What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the No Starving Artist podcast. Very, very excited to get into this episode today. We have somebody on who will be talking about a style and a genre of dance that we have yet to really touch on. I haven't had anybody who's been an expert in that field yet. So I'm very, very excited for that. As always, www.nsadance.com, nostarvingartistdance.com. You can find all of the information about the podcast, about the brand, dance critiques, online coaching, etc. But without further ado, we're going to be jumping in today. We have Mina Pro on the podcast today. So everybody give it up for Mina. I'm going to bring her in, have her do a little introduction, and we're going to jump right in.
Hey, everyone. Hi.
Give people a little rundown on who you are and kind of a little bit of background as well.
Yeah. So, hey, y'all. I'm Mina Pro. I am a professional dance educator, movement specialist with an emphasis on ballroom dance. I'm also an international performer. I also own Studio 303, a performance and competitive-based ballroom dance studio out of Green Bay, Wisconsin. I also co-own Le Carnival Ballroom Dance Competition out of Green Bay, Wisconsin. And when I'm not, managing all those pieces, I am cultivating a community by professionally mentoring and coaching youth and adult dancers.
Love it. Love it. Love it. What got you into, were you always a ballroom dancer?
No, I started like most of us little kids in a dance studio, ballet, tap, jazz. It wasn't until I was about 15 that I stepped aside from, secular dance and specialized. I actually was a competitive Irish dancer for a long time and then got into ballroom because I went to Ireland and did a show with Riverdance Productions that required partnering skills. So I took a ballroom class before I went to go do that show and fell in love with ballroom and continued it ever since.
Interesting. You got bit by the bug, eh?
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And so at this point, is your as far as teaching goes, is it a wide range of teaching? Are you primarily working with adults now?
I teach everything from 4-year-olds to 60-year-olds.
Amazing. 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 I love that. Okay. I wanted to kind of like jump right in with I watched through some of your content and I think it's a very, very interesting thing. And I think ballroom and tap sometimes get put into very similar categories in the competitive dance arenas.
Mm-hmm.
I think hip hop does as well, but I would say that hip hop is much, much more widely accepted and utilized, at least from my perspective. So,
Yeah.
I'm curious kind of where you are right now and what you're kind of rallying for right now. I've seen a few of your posts. I've seen a few of the things that you've kind of put out in terms of just almost advocating for ballroom as something that needs to be included into more studios. Is that something that you kind of are actively pursuing? And is it something that you feel like is being met with open arms, or is it something where you feel like there's still kind of a sticking point with studios?
Yeah. My platform right now is to educate pre-professional dancers, educators, convention owners, competition owners on how important ballroom dance currently is in the community to create a well-rounded pre-professional dancer. So one thing that I come across quite often is, well, we just don't do ballroom. Ballroom is not necessarily, like you said, well accepted within the community. And I find that comes from a lack of education of what's out there for professional dancers and how ballroom is actually utilized within the professional community, commercially or on Broadway.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean it's I didn't grow up in a studio, but I mean, it was very, like, once I started getting into dance and once I started working professionally, like, it was very much a pretty universal thing that I would hear all the time that, the ballroom dancers were the people that made the most money. They were the people that had the most opportunity. And the more I learned about it, the more I was like, man, maybe I should have started with a different style. I mean, even when it comes down to like teaching pay and private lesson pay, it's very, very different.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, I think I definitely agree. And from a partnering aspect as well, it's one of the only styles where partnering is a huge, huge focus. And like you said, a ballroom is huge here in Utah, but it's specific studios.
Mhm.
It's not a wide ranging thing at all. Where do you why do you think that is? Do you think is there something that you've seen that's like a contributing factor consistently?
Well, somewhere along the way in our country, ballroom dance was widely accepted. Think back to like some of our grandparents who danced jitterbug, danced swing dances socially. They went to dance halls on the weekends. They knew how to dance at school, not
Mm,
just like grinding on each other at school that we see some kids do nowadays, but like they actually social danced with each other. They knew how to
mm-hmm.
do a waltz, they knew how to dance swing. And somewhere along the way within our culture, we stopped putting the importance on being able to socially dance with people. But you see the usage of ballroom dance across the line from Broadway to movies. They use ballroom choreography to shows like Dancing with the Stars and So You Think You Can Dance. Ballroom is used everywhere.
Mm. Yeah, that's a very, very interesting take for sure. And yeah, I mean, it's true. It's very, I mean, dance in general is very, very different. But yeah, there was a time period where those styles, especially the ones that you talked about, were very, very prevalent in like society, not just in dance in general, but just in society as a whole.
Mhm.
Um, and this bleeds over as well to like competition. You rarely outside of obviously there's like the massive ballroom competitions that are huge and that's their focus. But when we're talking about like competitive dance from a studio standpoint, there's really no representation whatsoever unless you happen upon one of those studios, excuse me, that specializes in it.
Mhm.
Um, have you noticed like a difference in different parts of the country? Is this something that you're seeing as just a widespread thing? And is it, I guess the blunt question would be, is it an issue or do we just let it live in these specialized studios?
I mean, the way I see it, that ballroom is used more often than people realize.
Hmm.
Um, I do think there is kind of this mask within the dance society where, as dancers, doesn't matter what dance style we do, we can find similarities of our specialties in
Mm.
all dance forms. A tapper could watch a hip hop move and say, oh, that's kind of like this move, and
Right.
so on. So it's very easy for contemporary or jazz to find similarities within ballroom
Hmm.
and just call it jazz or just call it contemporary.
Uh,
Where when I look at it, I'm like, that's all ballroom. That's what I was
yeah.
trained in. That's all ballroom. So I find that, it's not that ballroom's not used as often. I think there's just maybe a little bit of a lack of education of what ballroom actually is.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And it's even more interesting when you look at the overlap of this um from a deeper standpoint where again I kind of mentioned there's similarities between ballroom and hip hop and tap in terms of this conversation, and the other very big similarity is they're all cultural dance styles traditionally, um which is a very, very interesting thing to think about. But it makes you wonder too, and it's funny that this conversation is happening right now because I filmed the video last night. I didn't really like it, which I never do that. But it was like so I'm going to refilm it today. But I was having this thought. I was watching the whatever college nationals just happened in Florida,
Mhm.
and I was like watching these dances. I'm like, man, none of these jazz dances are jazz. None of these hip hop dances are hip hop.
Yeah.
Like, are we approaching a time period where styles just kind of dissipate in general? And is that good?
Well, you see, I think there's always been fusion.
Yeah.
Like we kind of slap fusion over the top of it, and
Mm.
we say, well, I blended these two things, so now it's fusion.
Hmm.
So like I have kind of a purist perspective with being specialty trained in ballroom, but
Right.
I watch Latin jazz, and this is not to knock Latin jazz at all. It's just I look at Latin jazz and it looks like Zumba to me.
Mm.
it looks like someone watched ballroom dance who's a jazz dancer and said, "Oh, I could kind of do that."
Mm,
And they took bits and pieces, which this is what dance is. We take ideas and inspirations from each other
right.
to create our art form. But in some ways too, I mean, again, I used to be an Irish dancer,
Yeah.
so I'll equate some of this to watching drunk people on St. Patty's Day do a little jig on the corner, and it looks absolutely nothing like what I spend hours a day doing.
Right, right.
So, like, in some ways, you've got us purists, but I mean, there's purists in ballet, there's purists in hip
Yeah.
hop, there's
Yeah.
purists
Yeah.
everywhere, but we've always had fusion.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's necessarily going to get rid of these original dance styles, but there's always going to be fusion.
Yeah. Do you think maybe it's because the other thing that I agree with you. I think ultimately I agree with you. I think where I feel like the shift is happening is kind of what you mentioned, where there's also you pair that with a lack of education,
Yeah.
and then you become you start to have an odd combination. Because I know for me, I never really was that keen on what is or isn't hip hop or even like anything like that until I learned, about the history of hip hop and the culture of
Mhm.
hip hop. And, I started to, obviously not identify, but I started to, just recognize. And then I started to become like a little bit more like, oh, okay, like one, I get it. But two, I understand why there's a reason to keep some of these borders in place.
Mhm.
So do you think that's sometimes, and I mean, I think you already spoke to this a little bit, but do you think that's where a lot of the excess of fusion happens, is in these realms of uneducation? And how do we correct for that? I mean, I work with a lot of studios or even dancers who, access is something that they kind of point to when it comes to things, especially specialty styles. Would you say we're past that? I don't want to demean it
Yeah.
by saying it's an excuse, but do you
Yeah.
think we're past that at this age of like unlimited access?
Definitely. I think with all the outrageous amount of technology and information that we have at our fingertips, there really shouldn't be an excuse there anymore for a lack of education.
Right, right.
Now, I like when it's a pre-professional dancer, a kid coming out of a studio, that's not their problem. That's on the educators.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's where I say the educators need to make sure that they're doing their due diligence of knowing what they're teaching. Now, I'm not saying that you have to know, at least for ballroom, I'm not saying that you have to know all the cultural references and where each dance style originated from and all those bits and pieces. But just knowing like ballroom dance should be part of the education for a pre-professional dancer, even if it is only in convention
mm,
and not or only in like a brought in guest teacher. It doesn't have to be a mainstay within your studio, but at least expose them to it, because they're going to be exposed to it when they decide to make that leap, whether that's commercial or Broadway, or let's say they run into a ballroom dance club when they're in college. Most
yeah.
professional ballroom dance educators I know weren't exposed to ballroom until they were in college.
Interesting.
So they came out of their ballroom dance experience in a college club and then found studios like Fred Astaire's and Arthur Murray's, or independent studios like my own, where then they got trained up later in their 20s out of college.
Gotcha. 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 Interesting. Okay. Okay. I like that perspective a lot. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think it really sort of starts to eliminate that kind of it is an excuse. I think sometimes it's a naive excuse, but it is an excuse that access isn't there, because to your point, it doesn't need to necessarily be something that's a part of your curriculum, but even, giving dancers little bits allows them to
Exposure.
differentiate between like kind of what you were pointing out. Oh, this isn't truly ballroom, but there's aspects of it that
Yeah,
still gives more power to that dancer to understand what's happening.
exactly. And The misconceptions I come across a lot with educators or convention owners is that they think that ballroom has to be partnered. They think that you have to be partnered, or they think that the partnership has to be boy and girl.
Yeah.
And that's a common misconception within ballroom dance. I mean, if you watch Dancing with the Stars and So You Think You Can Dance, it's usually single, at least for So You Think You Can Dance, it's single dancers that get on the show, not a partnership that gets on the show.
Yeah.
Or in Dancing with the Stars, you watch all those professional routines that they put out there. They're not always partnered while they're dancing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of times when you see dance studios bring large groups to competition, they're not always
partnering. No. Yeah.
So yes, in the roots of ballroom dancing, it's partnership dance. But in this more modern time, we've found ways of still using the dance style and still being an independent dancer.
Yeah. Yeah. And it speaks even more to like, you know, those kind of thoughts of, oh, well, we, you know, because it's something I've also heard of, like, oh, we don't have any male dancers, or we don't have any, you know, we can't do any partnering. And I think, again, it's this testament of like, it's not necessarily about creating, at least in my view, professional ballroom dancers, but even just more capable dancers who understand the styles a little bit more. Would you kind of agree with that?
Totally. And I mean, I'll say it again, ballroom dance has been used since the 1930s in cinema. Ballroom dance has been used on Broadway in shows like Grease and Moulin Rouge and In the Heights. It's been used in that choreography.
Yeah.
Ballroom dance has its own TV shows with Baby Ballroom on Netflix and Dancing Queens on Bravo. So there's more than just dancing as a professional ballroom dance educator.
Yeah.
And only being in that world if you're going to be a ballroom dancer. You can go on tour with Dancing with the Stars. You can go on tour with a Broadway show, especially these pre-professional kids that have dance experience in other dance styles.
Yeah.
Where traditionally a kid that starts in ballroom, that's all they do is ballroom.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Well, and it brings up an interesting thing, like you mentioning all of these kind of moments of history, but also just current times, because it is arguably one of the most commercialized styles of dance, at least wide ranging, which makes it even more interesting why it's not a focal point of more studios, because, you know, studios are ultimately a business. They're seeking to offer classes that their customer would seem valuable to. So it feels like it would make sense for more studios to offer ballroom because the opportunity is there. So do you think that there's kind of a duality of miseducation here, where the consumer, the parent or the dancer, also doesn't really understand the value of the style?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Like I said, somewhere along the lines, especially within our culture, we stopped really thinking about ballroom in some aspects. You know, again, I'm not knocking any dance styles. Hip hop came along and hip hop was fun and it was new and it was exciting and it went with all the new music that was coming out.
Right.
Ballroom was locked in the past. Ballroom was looked at like something your great grandma did, or something you did at a cotillion, or something that was stuffy and very like upper class.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not until more recently where now salsa dancing is becoming really popular. Bachata, merengue is becoming really popular. Now, that's great, but that's still a form of ballroom dance.
Right.
It's not just, you know, old white people in ball gowns dancing around to classical music.
Yeah.
As we can see with Dancing with the Stars, it is such a wide range. Some of my content that I've put out is educating people on exactly what dance styles are ballroom.
Right.
And there are 5 different major categories within ballroom that have all sorts of sub dances underneath them. So like hip hop, there are lots of subcategories within hip hop.
Yeah.
Now, even with jazz is creating its own subcategories within jazz.
Right.
So I find that, again, coming back to an education piece, there's just not an full enough understanding there as to where ballroom can take you professionally. That's not just teaching ballroom, and exactly where it's used.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So where would you recommend, this is kind of a later in the episode question. I would usually ask this, but I think it's a great time. So where would you recommend, let's go dancer first, a dancer who's hearing this and they're like, okay, cool. Like I'm into it. I like this idea. Where's a good starting point? Where's some things that they can navigate to? Is there like an easy Google search that they can do in their area to try to figure out what a good step is?
Yeah.
Or is it, is there a room where it's just as easy as just bringing it up to your studio and just saying like, hey, I'm interested in this?
Yeah. It is just as easy as bringing it up to your studio owner, bringing it up to your teachers, bringing it up to your parents. There are plenty of conventions out there. There are plenty of competitions out there that bring people in like me that have secular dance background, but also have specialized in dance styles like ballroom dance. So there is opportunity to go to conventions and learn how to do ballroom dance, or at least get exposed to ballroom dance. There are plenty of opportunities for your teacher or for your studio owner to contact people like me that own ballroom dance studios in the local area that could easily come in and teach an intensive, or you go to their studio for an intensive. Unless you're wanting to take that leap into the ballroom world, I don't think it's necessary for a student to leave their studio and go to another studio to take extra lessons, unless that's something they want to pursue. But always just saying to your teachers, hey, I would love to be exposed to this. Could you bring somebody in? Or, hey, could we go to this convention because I saw that they're going to have ballroom?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I love that perspective. And I think like what I've learned from doing these episodes and just speaking with more people is like, there's easier ways to do things than maybe we think there is. And I think this is a particular style where, but it's also sometimes it's hard for me to sometimes give grace to some of these things because, again, there's just so much relation. Hip hop is very similar in which a lot of studios, they might have a hip hop teacher, but it may not be someone who's really, involved. They may not really understand the style that much. And it's hard to have a ton of grace, especially at the moment, because we're seeing this huge influx of studios, going well out of their means to include acro in their curriculums and to bring in, specialized acro staff, and they're sending their teachers off to acro trainings, and they're doing all these things for a style that when we, not to compare, like you said, it's not that one style is better than the other, but when we do take apples to apples, the opportunity in a style like ballroom is tenfold the opportunity of somebody who's really strong in acro. I mean,
Yeah.
you're really pretty pigeonholed to Cirque du Soleil at that point. If you're looking for something that's very, very heavy in acro, that's pretty much it. Whereas ballroom, I mean, like you've mentioned, you could go. I talk with dancers a lot about what do you want to do? Okay, well, if you want to go more into film, you need to go to LA. If you want to go more into live performances, go to New York. With a style like ballroom, your opportunities open up so much more because there's things for you to do in both of those spaces.
Definitely.
So it's interesting that studios don't have, I don't know. The more we're talking about it, the more I'm like, why is this not something that studios are super, super passionate about?
Yeah, definitely. And I see where you're coming from too. So I teach a youth program at a regular ballet tap jazz type of studio. And I see the kids getting really excited about doing, all the tricks and all this kind of fun acro stuff. And yeah, it's really cool and it's really impressive to take a video of it and put it up on your Instagram or your TikTok. And I get it. But at the end of the day, as a professional performer, I can tell you the hardest tricks I ever had to master because I thought it was going to help me in competition. Now, this is in Irish dance and this is in ballroom. Those tricks that I learned how to do did not benefit me as a professional performer or as a professional educator. Those things did not help me because I never did them again.
Yeah.
I never had to do a triple kick. I never had to do, we had these different tricks that we did in Irish dance that I never had to do again. They were never choreographed in a show. They were never something that I taught most of my kids how to do, or most of my dancers how to do. That, it was really impressive to push myself to learn how to do it when I was young, but it didn't benefit me in any way to learn certain things that seemed really exciting. Now, there could be kids that are really passionate about acro, and then they also do gymnastics or they do other things. Now, maybe those dancers do go into Cirque du Soleil.
Yeah.
Maybe they do go into some of those shows, and there is opportunity for them to perform on cruise ships and different things.
Yes.
There are opportunities there, but you're right. They are very pigeonholed as far as where they can go or what shows they can go into.
Yeah.
Whereas ballroom does open up a lot more doors.
Yeah.
As far as teaching, performing, commercial, Broadway, it opens up a lot more doors.
100%. I know you teach on conventions as guest faculty. Is there something that you see, because I know like when I'm teaching a hip hop class, for example, it brings out things in the kids that maybe aren't strong in hip hop that I wouldn't maybe normally see in another class. Is there something that you see kind of consistently amongst dancers when you're teaching in a setting where they're not specifically ballroom kids? Is there something that it brings out of them that is pretty universal in terms of a weakness that you see?
A weakness in the dancer.
Yeah.
Weight transfer and bounce. I find ballroom dance is difficult for kids that are not trained in it when they have a hard time keeping their feet close together, keeping their knees tight together, weight transfer and bounce through some of the movement. I never throw kids onto heels right away. I mean, heels is a big part of dancing in ballroom, but I never throw kids into heels right away because there's so much foundational bounce and weight transfer things that we have to work on to get them really stable as far as like a technique piece.
Right.
But I've seen ballroom bring out crazy showmanship out of kids. These kids get so excited and so sassy when they get into some of the ballroom stuff that I have seen kids that one of their comments all the time is performance. Tap, jazz, hip hop, and they get comments on performance and facials and all of that. And then they step into ballroom and it's a whole different kid. It's a whole different kid on the floor. I don't know if that's the music or the fringe shaking around or what it is, but there's something that pulls some of that showmanship out of them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Weight transfer and bounce. That's a very, very interesting thing to kind of point to. And I think it leads, one thing I've been like more in tune with lately than I ever have before is just the kind of like bleed that ballet has had into a lot of other styles. And I think that there's a lot of things coming out of that as a result, including things like that, because it's just a lot of the other the other styles inside of studios that are happening inside of studios are heavily influenced by ballet. And so when you throw a dancer into a style that's very much so outside of that realm, they tend to struggle a lot, just because they're not really used to having the freedom that some of these styles have. And the it's not as particular when it comes to certain things as it is when we put this like kind of ballet lens on. But that's a really, really interesting, that would have been my assumption, is weight transfer specifically. I would have never thought about bounce, just weight because transfer. I think probably because I'm not super familiar with a lot of the ballroom styles and like the technicalities of them, but weight transfer makes sense.
Yeah.
As far as your competition goes, because I'm really, really intrigued in that sense of things, how did you get involved with that? Was it something that you started? Was it something you joined later on?
Yeah. So as far as owning my own competition, it was me, my husband, and another professional in the area
Hmm.
that we've worked with for a long time. There's not a lot of competitions that are within the Midwest, and I say Midwest as far as like Minneapolis, Milwaukee, Chicago kind of area.
Mhm.
There's not a lot of competitions in our area. So we decided to team up and start our own small competition at first. This is going to be our third year.
Amazing.
So we are still new, but it gives opportunity for our dancers to have another place to dance and to show off their skills that they work so hard to have.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what's the response been? Has it been relatively good? Are you guys growing? Is it the other thing that I'm interested in is it having an effect on studios in the area? Are you seeing more studios wanting to be interested in ballroom?
You know, it's been a growing success. I'm sure any competition owner, convention owner, studio owner knows
Mm,
that things always start small and it's little incremental growth every year.
yeah,
And I'm sure people know, well, every year you got to make it better and better. So budgets get bigger, and you just always hope that people get excited by what you're producing and what you're bringing for their dancers.
yeah,
Um, every year we have grown a little bit. Every year we've seen more dancers. You know, we went from dancing in a community theater hall for free to dancing in a big convention center space.
it's amazing.
So,
It's
you
amazing.
know, we've had really great feedback from other dance studios in the area, and everyone has loved being able to have a ballroom competition in their back door and not having to drive to Chicago or Minneapolis,
Yeah.
just being able to have something a little closer by.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. What would you say in your experience from a teaching standpoint is kind of the effects of ballroom mentally on dancers? Because I've heard things before when it comes from ballroom just about certain things that it can instill in dancers or even certain ways that it empowers them. What's been your kind of experience with things like that?
You know, everyone has a different journey
Hmm.
through ballroom dance. I have worked with adults that have grown so much with their confidence,
Hmm.
with their communication skills, with their interpersonal skills, all from ballroom dance. I always say with my adult dancers, ballroom dance is just the vehicle that brings you towards your goals. I have so many competitive ballroom dance adults that enjoy ballroom dancing and they love going to competitions, but the placements don't matter to them. They
Hmm.
continue dancing because they got a job promotion, because they can stand in front of a room of people now and present and talk to hundreds of people
Yeah.
because they put themselves out there to do ballroom dancing, to do competitions. I have women that have grown adult women walk into my studio that were very, very shy. And through ballroom dance, they met their husbands.
Hmm.
They met their husbands through the studio. They
Yeah. Yeah.
they grew their own dance family within the studio. So, from an adult perspective, there's so many more life things that you gain from
Hmm.
ballroom dance than than you would from just going to take like an adult tap class or an adult ballet class somewhere. I
Yeah.
mean, those are
Yeah.
great. I still do that to this day. I go and I pop into an adult dance class to keep
For
myself
sure.
moving,
For sure.
but I don't find some of the personal growth that I see with some of my ballroom dance adults.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then as far as with our youth, we're teaching things like respect and consent
Hmm.
and interpersonal manners like chivalry and different pieces like that
Hmm.
that I find kids miss out on a lot nowadays.
That consent piece is a really interesting one. I would have never thought about this. And this kind of a little bit like it doesn't contradict, but like this, we're talking in the sense of like partnering, right? Like when
Yeah.
you're working with a partner. So those studios that do have that access, I don't know why I've never thought about that before. That's such a interesting take, because I mean, I would imagine that there has to be some sort of at least at this point, maybe not back in the day, but
Wow.
where we're at now, there's probably some sort of, education or involvement before things even start of like, okay, here's how this goes. So I would have never thought about that before.
There's a proper way to ask someone to dance. Even if you don't use the words, "Will you dance with me?"
Yeah.
We always tell our leads. Now, I say leads because I could dance the lead part with a female student,
Right.
or you could have a gentleman dance the lead part. So our
Right.
leads,
Right.
the ones that initiate the dance, you're either asking them to dance with you beforehand or you're offering your hand. There are different verbal or nonverbal ways to get consent from someone to dance with them. And there's also throughout dancing proper ways of holding your frame. Your hand should not go on the small of someone's back. It should be up by shoulder blades. Just certain appropriate things that we wouldn't think about at first, especially if you're just, throwing kids through choreography.
Yeah.
You're not going through some of those pieces because you're just trying to get the routine done.
100%. 100%. Interesting. I'm curious. This is a little bit of a pivot, but it's. I think it will be interesting. Something that people listening would be interested in. What's the opportunity like, or what's the availability like for dancers who do have a sense of ballroom, or maybe it's something they have been training in after studio? Is there opportunity for them in college spaces? I mean, I know a lot of colleges have ballroom programs or ballroom teams. Is it something that's very competitive? Is it something that there's scholarships around?
So as far as the collegiate space goes, there are ballroom clubs within different colleges or universities that are really, really well known for building competitive ballroom dancers. So Brigham Young has a huge ballroom competitive group.
Yep.
The University of Minnesota has a huge ballroom group. There are colleges and universities that have that, but there are still a lot of small colleges and universities that still have ballroom clubs. They might just not be competitive, and they're just social dancing. Like I said, a lot of teachers that I know were exposed in college, not as kids.
Yeah.
But if you did have a kid that grew up exposed to ballroom dance or competed in ballroom dance and wants to do something with it through college, your best bet is to either continue dancing competitively through your studio while you're going through college, or attend one of these college or universities that have a competitive group or club. And then afterwards, you have the opportunity to professionally compete. Now, that's where you and a partner professionally compete at these different competitions, and you can win money that way, and you can do that for a while. But most people, to be able to sustain that, still teach. Any studio, if you are 18, you've got a dance background and you're wanting to train in ballroom, you could easily go to a ballroom dance studio, Fred Astaire, an Arthur Murray, or an independent studio like my own, and you can audition and you can apply to be part of their training programs, and they'll train you without ballroom dance background to be a ballroom dance educator.
Yeah.
I personally think it's much easier to have some sort of dance background.
Right.
When you're going to step into that. But I have seen people come in off the streets with no dance background, no actual like studio dance background.
Yeah.
Come in and become ballroom dance educators and successful ballroom dance educators.
Interesting. Well, and kind of bouncing back too on the club side of colleges, I would imagine that there's still some kind of, back to our previous point, is like, just from a social standpoint, having a group of people that you can immediately kind of connect with and immediately kind of be a part of going into college can make a huge difference in terms of like your overall college experience. So even if you whether you, like you said, whether you have experience or not, seeking out, if you maybe you have dance experience and you're not super interested in like dance team or something like that, something like a ballroom club could be a great opportunity for you to, immediately have a group that you can kind of associate with.
Yeah.
And then you could, I mean, who knows, maybe you fall in love with it and then you have opportunity once you're done as well. But in the meantime, you have that. So that's really, really, I love that. But I didn't know that. I didn't know that they're obviously aware of like Fred Astaire studios and the Arthur Murray studios, but I wasn't aware that they would train you.
Yeah. Yeah. They have huge training programs. I myself started with Fred Astaire Dance Studios, and I started off as a student. Then very quickly was swooped up into the training program, and I trained and learned the syllabus, was certified through their training program to be able to
Yeah.
teach ballroom dance. And that's where my career started, was through Fred Astaire Studios.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I want to jump back and kind of lead down a little bit more on like where you're at right now and what you're working on right now and what kind of your goal and focus is. So maybe even just expanding on like not just where you are, but where you see this going. What is like the dream world that you're building look like for you as like a platform and as an individual?
My dream end to all of this is to be able to see more wider acceptance of ballroom dance within the dance community, and just another understanding that there is more opportunities for dancers that are exposed to ballroom dance than certain other dance styles or bits and pieces. Again, not knocking any dance styles, just like you had said before, acro doesn't necessarily open a lot of extra doors for dancers, whereas ballroom could open doors for dancers that necessarily are already there for them. But just continuing educating dance educators, pre-professional dancers, on the importance and the prominence of ballroom dance within the industry already.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you hit it on the head earlier, and then in some of the, like I said, some of the content that I had seen from you, that it is interesting. I've never really, I mean, I'm fully aware of it, but I've never overthought it, of like the fact that ballroom is definitely seen as like it's seen as like this kind of like mystic
Secondary.
styles.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like if a studio does do ballroom, everybody's like, oh wow, like they train in ballroom, but it's like, there really isn't, in my head, there's not that many gates keeping a studio from just involving ballroom in their program.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure where the mindset is on that. I would love to talk to other studio owners, other convention owners, to see where their mindset is on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it seems like it's just a lack of education, like I've said before, on the opportunities that are there for ballroom dance and why it's important to at least expose your dancers to ballroom dance. Again, not bringing in a specialty teacher. I know one of the things that I've came across is, well, I would have to bring in a very specialized trained dancer. Okay, well, a ballet dancer, a ballerina is still a very specialty trained dancer. Certain hip hoppers are very specialty trained dancers.
Yeah.
So you already do that.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of ballroom dance studios all over the place, in major cities, in minor cities. There are plenty of dance educators like myself that are at conventions, that are at regular competitions, that are going around and teaching intensive, summer intensive and guest teaching at other dance studios all the time, all over the country. Right. We are here and we are wanting to expose your dancers to another opportunity that's there for them.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe there's something to the fact of like kind of what we've been talking about, that like maybe because there is so many opportunities for ballroom dancers and people who do specialize in ballroom, that they just don't find themselves in competitive studio spaces that often, which I think is fair. But again, I think to the kind of the point that you're making, it's still like there's still plenty of ways for studios to include it, and rather quickly. I mean, it's not something that you necessarily, I liked what you said earlier, that it doesn't have to necessarily be something that's a reoccurring class, but even just giving these kids the opportunity to kind of be exposed to it, because we're even seeing it in convention circuits more and more. I don't know if you've noticed this, but it's been something that I've noticed more and more conventions picking up, it seems like.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, again, a convention is a business, a dance studio is a business, a competition is still a business. And at the end of the day, we are looking for opportunities to allow the dancers to do more within our businesses.
Yeah.
And ballroom is something that the kids are very excited about. The dancers are very excited and interested about ballroom. That like I said, I would love to sit down and talk with dance educators or convention owners that are of the opinion that ballroom is not a necessity to the dance world.
Yeah.
I would love to sit and talk to them and understand their point of view on that. Because like I've said through this whole thing, I find that ballroom dance is everywhere. It's very hard to step into the Broadway community and not find ballroom dance used in a show. It's very hard in the commercial industry to step into it and not see ballroom dance used in some respects. Just partnered dancing in general, whether you're partnering in contemporary, partnering in hip hop, partnering in anything, you are going to use terminology and techniques of ballroom dance.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that would be an interesting thing, and I guess anybody listening, I mean, if you're listening and you feel free to reach out and pose perspectives, because yeah, I think there's got to be something, but what it is I don't know, because I mean, I've experienced it. I've seen even weird stuff where like studios that compete ballroom routines, but they don't do ballroom, like they don't train ballroom, or just kind of odd disconnects like that where it's like they're aware of it, but they don't really include it in much more than just awareness, which is odd. Where can people because I want to also kind of allow people to check out your competition and just your studio. Where can people find you? Where can people find your studio? Do you have dates for your competition next year? Give us the scoop.
Yeah, so you can find and follow me on Instagram at I am Mina Pro. And then you can find my studio, Studio 303, on Instagram at Studio 303. And you can also find the competition, Le Carnival, on Instagram at Le Carnival, WI. We are currently finding our date for February, but Le Carnival always happens in February in Green Bay, Wisconsin at the KI Convention Center. And then my studio, we are, again, performance and competitive ballroom dance. I do teach outside of my studio. I do summer intensives, workshops, master classes at local dance studios and all over the country. And then I am going to be at Elevate Convention this coming fall in September and November. So shout out to Jadell Lee. So we'll see him there. But he's bringing me on for ballroom, and we're so excited because we know that ballroom was received really well and wasn't brought in last year. And a lot of dancers asked for it to come back. So we're really excited to bring ballroom back to Elevate.
I love that. I love that so much. And what would you say is something that if, anybody listening, no matter what their age is, what would be your thing that if they take away anything, if they take away one thing, what would it be for you right at this moment?
If you are a young pre-professional dancer, I want you to be exposed to as many forms of dance as you possibly can be, because it's only going to prep you more for being a professional dancer, whether that is commercial or conservatory or Broadway. All it's going to do is make you a stronger dancer. To dance educators, to convention owners, to competition owners, again, exposing your dancers and giving them the opportunity to do more is only going to help them. And it's only going to help us as a business owner, but it's going to provide the dancers that we are taking care of more opportunities as they grow up. To parents out there, again, giving our students, giving our dancers, giving our children the most opportunities that we can give them. I can say this as a mom myself. giving my kids all the opportunities that I can is the most important thing to me.
Yeah.
So the biggest piece I want everyone to walk away with is allow yourselves to find ways to have the most opportunities to try other dance styles, because it's only going to help you down the road.
Amazing. I love that so much. Mina, thank you so much. This has been amazing just to kind of get a peek into your world and pick your brain a little bit. I wanted to clarify too, your studio, adult classes, young classes, everybody. No experience needed.
No experience, no partner, nothing.
Love it. If you're listening, all links, everything Mina mentioned will be in the comments, in the description. So be sure to check that out if you're interested, if you're in the area. Take Ballroom.
Take Ballroom.
Thank you so much, Mina. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
your time.